So we are going to be looking at stress today. I think this is probably a very familiar term to everyone here, but we're going to be looking at ways to identify our stress and then how do we manage our stress. So let's look at what stress is, first of all. Here's a couple ways to define or to describe stress. So stress is a striving to meet a demand. It's a normal response to situational pressures, a physical, mental, or emotional strain or tension, a condition or feeling when an individual perceives that the demands exceed the personal and social resources available to them. So what I really want you to take away from this slide is that stress is actually a very normal part of everyday life. So especially for students, that it's not necessarily all a bad thing. And we're going to go on to discuss this a little further in just a minute. But yeah, let's take a look at stress in a little more detail, and let's move to the next slide, please, Sarah. Okay, so when we look at stress, we can often categorize it into two main groups. So we have chronic stress and we have what we call acute stress. So examples of chronic stress are stressful job, challenging relationships, a toxic home environment, maybe ongoing health concerns that you're faced with, maybe poor sleep habits, and lack of resources. So chronic stress is what we refer to as long-term stress. So feelings of stress that often occur over a long duration of time. And maybe while they don't feel really intense in the moment, as they build up, they start to experience more stress. So the other one we have is acute stress. So this is short-term stress, but they can often be really intense, but they're often short-lived. So some examples might be presentation in a class, a disagreement or a conflict with a friend, maybe concerns about an upcoming event or social situation that feels really daunting to you, a new challenge. You're running late, you missed the bus, you can't find parking, you lost your directions, just those really heightened acute stressors in the moment. All right, so let's move to our next slide here. So when does stress become problematic? Because we just identified it's a normal part of life, right? So stress becomes problematic when those stress levels become too high, or when stress itself, those stress levels are lasting for too long. So again, right, that acute stress that's really high, or that chronic stress. So this little image is a fun little image, and we call this a stress performance curve. And what it does is it actually shows us that, again, all stress is not necessarily bad, right? I think when we think of stress, we think of bad. And the reality is that it actually plays a really important and positive role in our lives. Okay, so if you look here, we actually perform best and we're most productive as humans when we're actually under some stress, right? We see that kind of optimal level of stress. So that's in that green zone. So that means that we feel motivated, right, by a little bit of stress, but we're not feeling so stressed that we're feeling anxious, overwhelmed, exhausted, and that burned out feeling, which I bet we can all relate to in some degree. So the goal is not to eliminate stress, right? We're not going to talk about ways to completely get stress out of your life because that's not possible, right? And as you can see, like minimal amounts of stress are actually not a positive thing. They can cause boredom, inactivity, demotivation. So ideally, we really want to learn how to manage our stress so that we find ourselves in that kind of green middle ground, right? And how can we harness stress so that we can use it for things like productivity, creativity, and focus. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but I really like this quote here. Stress is like fire. When controlled and used for a purpose, it serves us well. Left unbridled, it can consume us. I don't know about you all, but I can definitely relate to the feeling where my stress is just all consuming and it's not feeling productive and helpful anymore. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. So if we can move to the next slide, please, and thank you. Okay, so what does this all mean? So just like your toes, are not piggies, right? You know, this little piggy went to the market. Stress is not all bad. So I'm here to tell you that stress is not necessarily a bad thing, even though it can really, really feel like it in the moment. So stress is a normal human response and reaction. It's a normal part of everyday life as a student in particular, as well as moving forward in your life. It can help to motivate us. It can help us to perform well and to succeed, right? Those little experiences of stress that we feel can really help to prepare us for an exam, right? So that we study and we prepare ourselves, and that stress going into it can really serve us in the moment. And it can help us to really challenge ourselves, which of course can lead to personal growth. So it's important to note that, you know, everyone experiences stress at a different level, but at the end of the day, we can really use it to help us. And it's really that relationship to stress that that matters. All right, so let's move to the next slide, please. Okay, thanks, Sarah. So as Dr. Eliza mentions, that our bodies are actually designed to experience those short bursts of stress, right? And so she shares that when we experience those acute stressors and our body goes into that fight or flight, it actually is a natural process to recover after. So I always like to remind myself that, you know, we don't want to eliminate stress. It's not only me that is experiencing. I am hardwired as a human being. It's that biological standpoint that stress can actually be a positive thing, and it can actually serve a purpose in my life. So let's move on to our next slide. So I would love to hear from you all. And we can do, again, that little whiteboard cool thing that Sarah did earlier. You can also type in the chat, or you can turn on your camera or mic. What are some possible signs that stress is becoming problematic in your life? What are ways that you experience stress? Sorry, my vision is so poor. Yes, start waking up at night, right? So sleep disturbance, absolutely. Trouble sleeping, there's another one, yes. Another sleeping, so that inability to get a solid night's sleep. I notice myself running around too much. Absolutely, I can relate to that one. Hard to focus on tasks or avoiding tasks, absolutely. Can't focus, absolutely. I can't read that one. My vision. Can someone?
Oh, yeah, I can do the reading, Ashley. So we've got when all the small things start to aggravate you too much, which I absolutely agree with. You notice being more reactive to things that maybe wouldn't bother you so much in times when you were feeling better. And also an upset digestive system, which I can also relate to.
Yeah, me too. I know for me, I stress when my shoulders throb. So those physical complaints, right? As well as upset stomach and heart. Yes, absolutely. So there's lots of overlap there, right? We're seeing lots of sleep and focus and physical complaints. Absolutely.
It's kind of like all consuming. Is a really holistic experience, isn't it?
Body stiffness. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing that. And we'll move on to our next slide. And I think, you know, you all did a really wonderful job of identifying all the kind of different domains that stress can manifest in, right? Stress can manifest into all levels of our being. So it can affect us in our thoughts, which we refer to as cognitive. As you guys all identified, right? Those physical complaints, as well as emotionally. Yeah, that idea of irritability, or I know when I'm feeling really overwhelmed and stressed, you know, I might lash out, but I also might just break down and cry over something that seems insignificant in the time, right? And I'm just feeling so overwhelmed. And then the last one we have behavioral, or so our actions. So I think it's important for everyone to know that, everyone experiences stress differently, and you might experience stress differently over time, right? So, that idea that difficulty sleeping, maybe that has never affected you before, and all of a sudden that's a new symptom of stress for you. So we call these warning signs, or I like to say to students, what are your red flags for feeling overwhelmed and stressed? Maybe when you're starting to teeter into that, out of that green zone, like we talked about with that little image. So I think it's important how can we manage stress if we're not recognizing our cues or our red flags, right? I think we first need to be aware of what am I experiencing in my body, in my head and heart, and are these signs that I'm starting to feel overwhelmed and stressed out? So what I would get you to do is just, reflect on this slide here and, maybe make a mental note or write something down. But, what are the main ones on here that you really identify with? Again, you all did a really good job, but are there some on here that are really sticking out to you that goes, oh yeah, for me, that's a sign. So I'll just leave that up for maybe a couple seconds here. All right. So let's move on to the next slide, if we can do that, please. Okay, so we're going to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to look at how to manage stress. Okay, so again, I'm not saying we're going to look at how to eliminate stress, because again, right, that's not the goal. It's how to manage our stress when it's coming up for us. So going back to the clip with the little video with Dr. Eliza, she mentioned the idea of activation and then recovery. So I have a couple terms here. I have restorative response, activation and recovery, the idea of pendulation, and I'm going to kind of use them all interchangeably, but the gist is that we want to move from that state of alarm, state of really feeling overwhelmed, into a state that's more calm, secure, and restorative, right? It's the idea of pendulation. So moving from experience of stress into a state of relaxation and calm, because that's when the body does all that fantastic work that she was mentioning. So this may happen really naturally, right? So an example is that you're feeling really overwhelmed or nervous before a presentation, you give the presentation, and then after, you feel so much more calm and relaxed, right? It's over. And so your body goes into that natural restorative rest response, right? But what happens when it's not so easy to fix the stressor? So the good news is that, we can learn to actually consciously shift into those patterns of rest and relaxation, right? And so one of the best ways to do this is to intentionally engage in constructive rest and relaxation strategies. And we're going to go on to talk about some of those in a moment. But I'd encourage you to go to our OC website where we have our YouTube channel. We've got a whole whack of different resources on there, as well as these two links here. And I think Sarah was going to put them in the chat, but there's a whole bunch of different ways to actually engage in that intentional rest and relaxation that I really encourage you to check out when you do have some time. So a point that I really want to hit home is that it's about being intentional and implementing those strategies before we hit that stage of feeling super overwhelmed, burned out, and that breakdown stage. Again, moving from that state of activation into rest and recovery. So, should you implement relaxation strategies in the moment when you're feeling overwhelmed? Absolutely, I encourage you to do so. But I think it's when it's that ongoing stress that starts to sneak up on students, right? I think we can probably all relate to that, where you suddenly feel so overwhelmed and unequipped to handle everything that's going on. So again, it's important to be mindful of those warning signs that you are starting to experience stress, and then moving yourself intentionally back into a state of calm and relaxation, even if it's just temporarily. Okay, so now let's look at that latter part of how do we manage stress? What do we do with intense, or I think it's a really wonderful way to, a different way to explain that, stress is not going anywhere, right? Is that our cup is constantly filling up with life stressors, especially as students. There is so much on all your plates. However, if we can start to be intentional about recognizing that stress and intentional about putting in strategies, we can allow stress to keep coming in our lives and we can still be able to manage it. So let's look at some ways to manage it. Okay, so let's move to our next slide. So this is what we call the 3 N's, and this is just a simple way just to identify what you're feeling. Again, right, we can't acknowledge that we're feeling overwhelmed and stressed without identifying how we're feeling, and it can be really challenging to do that, right? So research suggests that when we actually just give a feeling a name, we simply label it, we call that affect labeling, it can actually bring heightened and negative emotions back down to a more neutral or baseline level, which is pretty neat. So this is called the 3 N's. So the first is just bringing awareness to the present moment and just contacting the here and now. And Sarah kind of did that when we did our mindful movement, just connecting with the present moment. And then noticing your experience in your body, in your mind, in your heart. And then the second is naming a feeling. So name your experience by giving it a feeling. So it could be, I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm feeling stressed out. I'm feeling irritable. And then the next step is normalizing your experience and your feelings, right? What would you tell a friend? Of course you're feeling overwhelmed. You're taking classes and you're working and you're commuting, right? And so it's really just acknowledging your feeling and holding it from a place of compassion versus judgment and ridicule. Because I think we are so often quick to say, I shouldn't be feeling overwhelmed and I shouldn't be feeling frustrated. And look at that person, they're doing this and this and not feeling it. I think we so often minimize our stress and we don't hold it from that compassionate place. So again, this is the more and more you become aware of your feelings, the more likely you can begin to notice when you're starting to experience feelings of stress and strain and tension. All right, so we'll move to our next slide, please. Okay, so this is back to the basics. So I think so often, we forget about the basics, the role of a busy student. I hear this over and over again, I'm not sleeping well and I'm not taking time to eat a healthy diet and, I'm not connecting with others. And so I think it's really important to draw attention that coming back to those basics and being intentional about how much sleep do I get, do I have food in my fridge to eat a healthy meal or to have breakfast this morning before class? I think these are so important. And while they might seem minimal, I think they're kind of like drilling those holes. They allow for a bit more room in our stress bucket. So getting enough sleep, focusing on that sleep hygiene, eating a healthy diet, right? During peak times of the semester, do I have space to do some meal planning and prepping so that I have a meal to eat that's healthy? Am I drinking water? Reducing caffeine, right? We know that when we're feeling stressed or anxious, drinking a whole bunch of caffeine can make us feel even more elevated and dysregulated in our bodies. And then avoiding unhelpful or unhealthy habits, right? Being aware of why we're doing certain things. Are we doing certain acts to try to avoid our feelings and avoid stress? If that is, those stress are probably going to come back, and quite often they do come back even more powerful, or those feelings of anxiousness, right? And connecting with friends. Again, it's a basic, or connecting with others, I should say, but, maintaining those connections in your life or your college or your community. All right, so some more ways to manage stress. So I laugh, but what's more basic than breathing, right? And yet, how often do we think about our breathing? I know for me, I don't think about my breathing. And then when I do, I notice, oh, it's really shallow and I'm really just breathing from the top of my body, right? I must be feeling stressed and overwhelmed. So when we bring awareness to our breath and we deeply breathe from our whole body, it actually, the brain sends a message to our nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system, to actually start to calm and relax our body, right? So it reverses all those things that stress and cortisol does. So it lowers our heart rate and it brings blood back to our circulatory system. And it does a whole bunch of really, really wonderful things. So deep breathing is a skill. It's a skill that we need to practice. And so often students will say, like, well, I tried that deep breathing thing when I was, feeling really overwhelmed, but it was really hard. And I say, I know it really is. And it's a skill that we want to practice, and we want to practice usually when we're in more of a calm state, so that the time comes when we are feeling really stressed and really overwhelmed, that we can utilize that skill, right? It's just like basketball. You don't go out and play a basketball game, right? You learn how to dribble and you learn how to shoot, and you practice the skill for the big game. So that for people. Any comments? Yays, nays?
I'm with you, Ashley. I teach box breathing, but I find just following the image more relaxing, I think.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Sarah. It's kind of like a visual anchor, right? To anchor you to the present moment and then to focus on your breath. So like I said, breathing is a skill, and it's really about finding the right breathing technique that works for you. And again, practicing it in a time where you maybe feel a bit more grounded, so that you can utilize it in those times of stress. All right, so let's move on to write it out, or get it out, I often say, right? So we call this externalizing. And so what this means is, in some way, shape, or form, getting our emotions, our feelings, our thoughts of stress out, separating ourselves from the problem, creating some distance between ourselves and the feelings of stress. I don't know about you all, but when I'm feeling overwhelmed and stressed, it's the thoughts are just like going on in my head, right? And to be able to get it out in some way, shape, or form, it just allows me to be a bit separate. And then I can actually look at those stressful thoughts from maybe a different vantage point, or I can hear myself talk them and think, okay, I can manage this. So, identify your stress. Ask yourself, why are you feeling stressed? Make a list. Journal, right? So writing out our thoughts and feelings about current stressful events, past things, this can be super free flowing and just letting what's coming out in the moment, put it down, pen to paper, or it could be, utilizing more of a guided journal that's prompting you to look at your thoughts and feelings. Focusing on gratitude, right? Even we kind of did that in the beginning, right? Like, even though things might be not going well for me, what went well? What are those little silver linings throughout the day or week? Self-help apps are a really neat way to, identify and plan and manage our stress. There's so many different creative ones that you can look at. Get creative, right? Sketch, doodle, draw, design, put pen to paper or felts or whatever it may be. Again, just focusing on what am I feeling and trying to get it out. And then texting friends or family, absolutely, reaching out and asking them for support, or just verbalizing, this is what I'm experiencing, this is what I'm going through, this is what I'm feeling really overwhelmed about. I'm curious with any of those. I think there's a little stamp thing on the annotate. Do these, resonate with anyone? If you were going to try on one strategy after, what would it be out of this kind of page here? Journal. Yeah. I see. Get creative. Yeah. Identify your stress, right? Acknowledging it, making a list. Text a family or friend. Absolutely. Focus on gratitude. Is that a heart? It is. Isn't that fitting? Lovely. Okay, let's move on for the sake of time here. Okay, so get moving. So these are also other ways to manage stress, right? And these can be both proactive to help prevent stress, again, like drilling those holes in that cup, or it can also be an intervention tool when you are feeling so overwhelmed, right? That restorative response in our body. So, moving our body, engaging in physical exercise. There's so much research around when we engage in physical exercise, it releases those dopamine and serotonin hormones in our brain. So connect with friends, arrange time to go for a walk or have a coffee date, a virtual coffee date. Have fun. Yeah. As students, how much time do you allow yourself to have fun? And I know it's hard to envision where in the heck you're going to put that in your busy schedule, but making time for little bits of fun and having a laugh, they can do so much for the soul, right? Assert yourself, saying no, setting boundaries that your cup is too close to overflowing. I can't do all these things that people are asking of me. And this is assertiveness, and this does take a skill. I acknowledge that it does take practice saying no, that it is not always easy. Seek professional help, absolutely, right? Like talking to a friend or a family member, and it might be one step further where you are looking for support from OC counseling services or community resources. But again, I put it under the get moving category of like taking those actions, right? These are very behavioral steps. Okay, where am I for time? I think I'm doing pretty okay. So this is, I can't talk about stress management without talking about the idea of mindfulness. Okay, so you've probably all heard about mindfulness, and bear with me. But what mindfulness is really focusing on present moments, paying attention on purpose without judgment. Okay, so when we experience stress, so often we are dwelling on the past, right? A remark you made, a comment that you thought, oh my gosh, why did I say that in class, right? We're constantly dwelling on the past, or the opposite is we are worrying about the future, worrying about that paper, that exam, that presentation, right? And so we often lose track of the moment, the here and now. And so the idea of mindfulness is placing attention on the moment in the here and now. And when we begin to focus on that, the brain begins to do a whole bunch of almost like magical things, right? It reduces our blood pressure in our bodies. It boosts immune hormones. It reduces feelings of stress and tension. And it actually promotes positive emotional responses in our brains and our hearts. So again, going back to the beginning, we talked about those intentional bits of rest and recovery and pendulation, right? Moving into a state of calm, and mindfulness is a really wonderful strategy to do. I had thought about giving this guided imagery a chance. I don't know if we have time, and I apologize, but this is just one way. There's so many different ways to engage in mindfulness, and guided imagery is one. And, I invite you, if you have time in your very busy lives and schedules, try this one. This is a guided imagery. So this is someone walking you through a forest and how to relax and to pay attention to the present moment. And again, with mindfulness, it's exactly like breathing, is you have to find the right fit for you, right? Yoga has elements of mindfulness and meditation. Breathing is a form of it. Even, different sports, it's anything of paying attention in the present moment. So I really invite you to play around. And I'll also say that your mind is going to wander. I often have students say, like, Ashley, I've tried meditation and I'm so bad at it because my mind keeps wandering. And I say, good, that's what your mind is supposed to do, right? It's not this Zen state. I think there's a misconception. Our brains are going to wander, and that's great. That means you're alive and well. And so I'm happy for that. What meditation is and mindfulness, it's about constantly being aware that, my thoughts are drifting, bring it back to the present moment. I'm thinking about my laundry, bring it back to the present moment. Is that a dog barking? Bring it back to the present moment. And like this is a skill, right? It takes time and practice, but if you've had that experience where you thought you're not very good at meditation or mindfulness, I really invite you to try it with maybe a new kind of framework or way of thinking about it and see if it could be useful for you. So I threw a lot of information at you all, and I'm going to leave you, sorry, we're just going to pop to the next slide, Sarah, with an activity. And it's just to reflect on today's discussion and really just look at all those different coping strategies and what ones have worked for you in the past. What ones did you think, yeah, I'm going to try that next time? And I invite you to, make a list. I think it's important if you have an ongoing list of ways to help manage stress, when you're feeling so overwhelmed in the moment, if you can go to that concrete list on your phone or you've jotted down somewhere, that can be really helpful to remind you what helps. And then we do have a coping chart here, and you're more than welcome to create something like this for yourself. But again, it's just a way to put down things and strategies so that it's really easy to draw on when you're feeling overwhelmed. So this is looking at what can I do during the day when I'm alone to help manage stress? So an example might be, I'm going to do that 3N thing Ashley talked about. Every time I drink a sip of water, I'm going to identify my feelings, right? Or it might be, I'm going to practice my breathing, whatever you can do during the day alone. So another, during the day with others, you know what, I am going to call my friend and I'm going to have a laugh with her, right? Or I'm going to, what's an example with others? I'm going to go for a jog, right? I really love running. I'm going to connect with my friend and I'm going to organize a jog. At night, what can I do alone to help manage my stress? Maybe it's have a hot bubble bath. Maybe it's try that meditation that we talked about, right? Maybe it's journal at the end of the night, all sorts of things. And then at nighttime, what can I do with others? I am going to watch a goofy, romantic comedy with my roommates or something like that, right? Or I'm going to call a friend that I haven't called in a while. And again, with the idea of really being intentional when it comes to managing stress, it's about intervening and being intentional about implementing these strategies before, like Dr. Smith, before that starts to feel overwhelmed and we feel like we're spewing out anywhere. So again, lots of information thrown your way. If you do have any questions, I always invite students, please feel free to email me or, I'm sure Lisa or Sarah. If anything didn't make sense what I talked about, or you want to go through some of this stuff and hash it out in a little more detail, please do reach out. That offer is always open from myself and from OC Counseling Services.